Good evening, everyone. I am Trish Regan in for Lou Dobbs tonight. Breaking news tonight. President Trump at this hour visiting Broward Health North, the hospital treating victims of this week's tragic school shooting in Parkland, Florida. The president's visit coming as FBI Director Christopher Wray faces calls to resign after the agency admitted it failed to act on a tip that essentially predicted the high school massacre 6 weeks ago. A person close to the confessed shooter, Nicholas Cruz, contacted the FBI on January 5th to report concerns he was plotting a school shooting and wanted to kill people. Now Attorney General Jeff Sessions has ordered a review of how that information could have ever been ignored. We're going to take all that up right here tonight. The other major story we are following, everyone, Special Counsel Robert Mueller today charging 13 Russian nationals and 3 Russian entities for trying to interfere in our elections. The Russians allegedly conducted information warfare against the U.S., but the DOJ made it clear that no American was a knowing participant in this illegal activity. President Trump reacting to the news, claiming vindication, tweeting that it's clear his campaign did nothing wrong. We are going to discuss the special counsel probe and the stunning lack of collusion evidence with Chris Farrell of Judicial Watch and Ed Rollins. Also with us, renowned attorney and legal scholar Jonathan Turley, all coming up tonight. More now on our breaking news. President Trump and the First Lady are at South Florida's Broward Health North Hospital, thanking the medical professionals for their life-saving assistance in responding to this week's tragic school shooting. The president had been expected to visit Parkland, and earlier today he tweeted he would meet with people, quote, whose lives have been totally shattered. Indeed, they have. But we did not know about the specifics of the trip, so that is new tonight. The president's visit does come as the FBI admits it mishandled, to say the least, a credible and specific tip about alleged shooter Nicholas Cruz. A caller warned the Bureau about Cruz's potential to conduct a school shooting, a warning that came about a month and a half before this tragedy that left 17 people, children, dead. Fox News correspondent Phil Keating is in Parkland, Florida tonight, and he has our report.
2 days after the worst high school shooting in U.S. history, a massacre the FBI was warned could happen, the agency now admits it failed to properly handle a January 5th tip from a person close to Nicholas Cruz about the suspect's gun ownership and his alleged desire to kill people, specifically to carry out a school shooting. That should have been forwarded up as a potential threat to life to the Miami field office. It was not. 5 weeks later, 17 students and teachers are dead.
On behalf of myself and over 1,000 employees of the Miami field office, we truly regret any additional pain that this has caused.
In an equally rare slap from the Attorney General to his FBI, Jeff Sessions released a highly critical admonition. Quote, "It is now clear that the warning signs were there and tips to the FBI were missed. We see the tragic consequences of those failures." And Florida Governor Rick Scott taking the outrage even further. Quote, "The FBI's failure to take action against this killer is unacceptable. 17 innocent people are dead, and acknowledging a mistake isn't going to cut it. The FBI director needs to resign." Also, in September, the FBI was unable to trace the source of an internet post by someone with the same name as the suspect, writing, "I'm going to be a professional school shooter." And Broward County Sheriff now clarifying what the alleged killer brought with him.
The killer never was in possession of a gas mask or any type of smoke grenades.
The former student expelled last year for disciplinary reasons, 19-year-old Nicholas Cruz, remains held without bond.
He's remorseful. He is fully aware of what is going on. And he's just a broken human being.
Emotions and politics continue to dominate this affluent community, while across the country, schools and police are dealing with copycat threats. Most have been social media hoaxes. And the devastation caused by the shooting for the community led several thousand people to gather together Thursday night at the Parkland Amphitheater for an emotional candlelight vigil. This student lost a close friend.
I think that he would appreciate what we're doing, and I think that people would want him to remember in a positive way.
And Trish, the Broward County Sheriff now says over the past few years, his office received 20 calls for service, specifically regarding 19-year-old Nicholas Cruz's behavior and actions. He says such calls in the future will now be far more scrutinized. And the Florida Sun Sentinel now reporting, quoting the public defender for Cruz, that the accused killer will agree to plead guilty to 17 counts of premeditated first-degree murder in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. Trish?
Thank you, Phil Keating. All right, in the nation's capital tonight, a shocking new indictment from special counsel Robert Mueller. More than a dozen Russians accused in an elaborate plot to meddle in our election. But the development is also bolstering President Trump's insistence that the Russia collusion investigation is one big sham. Fox News chief intelligence correspondent Catherine Herridge has our report.
Defendants allegedly conducted what they called information warfare against the United States.
With direct oversight of the Russia Special Counsel probe, the Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein said 13 Russian nationals and 3 Russian organizations were charged with, quote, conspiracy to defraud the United States and illegally using social media to divide Americans and disrupt the 2016 presidential election.
Russian conspirators want to promote discord in the United States and undermine public confidence in democracy.
As early as 2014, the 37-page indictment alleges the Russian defendants, including Yevgeny Prigozhin, a businessman with deep ties to Russian President Vladimir Putin, and their co-conspirators, began planning the operation from their base in St. Petersburg, Russia. The indictment says, quote, by early to mid-2016, defendants' operations included supporting the presidential campaign of then-candidate Donald J. Trump and disparaging Hillary Clinton. The defendants bought server space in the U.S. to create a virtual private network to hide the operation's Russian roots.
They used stolen or fictitious American identities, fraudulent bank accounts, and false identification documents. The defendants posed as politically and socially active Americans, advocating for and against particular candidates.
The indictment alleges that Russian operatives made contact with members, volunteers, and supporters of the Trump campaign. They were unnamed in the charge sheet. The Deputy Attorney General was asked if campaign officials were duped.
Now, there is no allegation in this indictment that any American was a knowing participant in this illegal activity. There is no allegation in the indictment that the charged conduct altered the outcome of the 2016 election.
The Russian operatives allegedly sought to hurt the candidacy of Trump's challengers, including Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio, and they allegedly aimed to bolster Hillary Clinton's challenger, Bernie Sanders. After the election, special counsel investigators found Russian operatives played both sides.
For example, the defendants organized one rally to support the president-elect and another rally to oppose him, both in New York on the same day.
Asked by Fox News whether the Russian government would cooperate in any future prosecution.
Have you had any assurances from the Russians that they will provide these individuals for prosecution?
No communication with the Russians about this. Will follow the ordinary process of seeking cooperation and extradition.
Also today, a California man pled guilty to selling bank account numbers to nationals outside of the United States between 2014 and 2017. A spokesman for the special counsel said they had no evidence the man was a knowing or witting participant in the Russian plot. Trish?
All right, thank you so much, Catherine Herridge. Joining me right now, George Washington University law professor Jonathan Turley. Good to see you, Professor Turley.
Thank you.
What are your thoughts on this?
Well, this has to be good news for the Trump team. I mean, it all actually comes down to a single adjective where they say that there were that the conversations that Trump officials had with a few of these Russians was unwitting in the sense that they didn't know that they were Russians. This was amplified by the Deputy Attorney General, who said that no American really knowingly had any interaction with this. That sounds a lot like no collusion. Many of us have been saying for a year that we don't see the basis of a criminal investigation into whatever collusion might mean. There's no crime of collusion in the criminal code. But what's really interesting is that this has been an investigation for a year with multiple plea agreements, the benefit of speaking with people like Michael Flynn, and yet they say we have no evidence, basically, of collusion. That includes an absence of any reference to the Trump Tower meeting. Now there, they knew they were dealing with Russians, but the investigators didn't include that as some type of evidence of collusion. So this has to be good news for the Trump team. It's bad news for us in the sense that...
And bad news for the FBI, perhaps.
Right, it's bad news because the Russians did interfere with our election. We have to take that very seriously. What also struck me, by the way, about this indictment is really how low grade a lot of this was. I mean, and how gratuitous it was. You know, you had a bunch of clowns going out there holding opposing protests, and I kept on reading this thinking, what are they achieving here? I mean, there was a real gap there as to any hope of really achieving anything after the election of holding protests and counter-protests.
We know what the Russians wanted to achieve. They wanted to increasingly divide us, right? So if you have a group celebrating the presidency of Donald Trump and you have another group lamenting it and protesting it, then they're trying to garner support on both sides so that they can increasingly force us to divide, which, fortunately, I don't think we're dumb enough to fall for that, but the thing I don't understand is, look, they have 12 Russians. Is that really going to make a difference? We are divided. There's millions of people on either side, and we're not getting along. Why Putin thought adding 12 Russians in outfits would make much of a difference, I still don't quite get. Well, it could be more than that. I mean, I don't know as Vladimir Putin cared who won this election. I think that he mostly cared just how he could disrupt our system and our process. And frankly, Professor, the fact that he and I believe the Russians were feeding a bunch of nonsense to Christopher Steele, who then was, of course, being funded by the Democrats and Hillary Clinton, and then that material made its way to the FBI, which then caused the FBI to be issuing FISA warrants. That shows us that Vladimir did exactly what he wanted to do. He undermined our system in a way that causes us to say, what the heck is going on?
Well, yeah, I think that I think there is a very important point there, in that I think the most serious thing that the Russians did was the hacking, was getting into the systems and selectively releasing emails. There's also evidence that they may have tried to do something more, actually interfering with voting. That's why this is also very important. The indictment is good news in one sense. It shows that the FBI was able to do an amazing job in taking this cyber trail and finding these people.
Really? I mean, I don't think they did such an amazing job. I look at the FBI and say, you guys are the ones that fell for the dossier.
Well, but you have to give them credit. This is no easy investigation. You're up against one of the largest intelligence organizations in the world. They were able to identify these sources. And people I think are underestimating the impact of getting tagged by the FBI. Yes, these people are not likely to be extradited, but they are on the radar screen, and they're going to stay there.
Look, we've always known that Russia wanted to interfere with us. I mean, this has been going on since the days of the Soviet Union and likely long before that. I think we have to be a lot smarter and anticipate their next move. So I'm not going to give the FBI a pass on this one, but I appreciate your generosity. Jonathan Turley, thank you so much. All right, we are coming right back with a whole lot more. Don't go anywhere.
Special Counsel Robert Mueller charging 13 Russians and 3 entities for meddling in our election.
The defendants allegedly conducted what they called information warfare against the United States, with the stated goal of spreading distrust towards the candidates and the political system in general.
We take up the explosive new charges with Ed Rollins and Chris Farrell of Judicial Watch. And growing outrage after the FBI admitted it failed to act on a tip that the Florida suspect wanted to kill people. Should the FBI director resign? Much more on that when we come back.
Breaking news tonight. President Trump moments ago speaking about the response to the tragic school shooting in Florida. The president is at Broward Health North Hospital visiting with medical professionals. Listen into this.
And they have done an incredible job. The doctor was amazing. We saw numerous people and incredible recovery. Incredible. And first responders, everybody. The job they've done is incredible, and I want to congratulate you. Incredible job.
Did you speak with victims, Mr. President?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did indeed, and it's very sad something like that could happen. But the job the doctors did, the nurses, the hospital, first responders, law enforcement, really incredible. The speed that they got the victims over to the hospital is like referencing one case 20 minutes and one case 19 minutes from the time of the shot. It's an incredible thing. Thank you very much.
Do our gun laws need to be...
Joining me right now, Ed Rollins, Great America PAC chairman, former Reagan political director, and Fox business contributor.
Thank you.
Ed, you know, it's a tough thing for a president to have happen on his watch.
It is, but it's very important what he's doing. He's basically going down there on behalf of all of us and saying thank you for every effort you made. There's nothing we can do about it at this point in time, but I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to try and bring people together and the resources. But just understand we care very deeply and we feel your loss, we feel your suffering. And that's an important message.
It's a message that gets put out, frankly, every time one of these things happens, and yet nothing's done. But this is a different kind of president. And I don't think he's a guy that believes in not seeing some action. What might he do? What might change?
I think what he can do, obviously you're not going to change the gun laws easily, and you're not, and you certainly may not have an inclination. But as a president, you can basically create a commission, you can bring people together, you can argue this, how do we stop this? How do we make sure security, bring local government people, educational people in, make sure the FBI is functioning properly. And I think to a certain extent, he's the only one that can do that. He can be the catalyst for a real change. We've done that on other issues in the past. We certainly did it after 9/11, and I think we have to do it now and bring people so they can at least vent their frustration and try and find some common solutions that you can put across the country.
The frustration. I mean, I don't know, like those poor parents, knowing that the FBI was warned not once but twice, and the second time didn't even follow up, didn't do a darn thing. What does that tell you about our FBI right now? Well,
I think the FBI is it's been under tremendous scrutiny, and it hasn't been functioning effectively. I mean, I go back to the dossier, which we were talking about earlier. The first question you normally ask is who paid for it? How did this information come here? If you'd asked who paid for it, you quickly would have found out it was the DNC and Hillary, and you'd have moved on from there. You wouldn't have gone through this drill. Equally as important, you say to the agent in charge of that office, what happened? Who was responsible, who got this message, and you fire him or you discipline him. You don't do what Governor Florida demand that the FBI director be fired. You demand the FBI director be accountable, and the president can do that.
It seems to me that the folks at the FBI don't know how to do their job. I mean, they clearly failed. They failed in Florida, and they failed on this whole Russia thing. I mean, the dossier, great example. They're so busy, you know, trying to believe whatever, you know, garbage they're being fed, that they're not actually paying attention to the real things that matter, and that's these kids' lives.
Right. You know, the FBI is a gigantic agency, and I would argue that 90% of them do a wonderful job and fight for us every single day. But there's certainly politics going on at the top under the Obama administration, and we need to make sure it doesn't continue. And we need to make sure we have proper people in there.
So is Christopher Wray the guy to do that? Because don't forget, you and I were talking on Tuesday when he gave his testimony, and he was asked point blank, are there biases at the FBI? To which he answered no. I mean, he didn't see any.
Well, there are biases, and obviously, would he have been my choice? No. Would he have been, you know, I think there are great law enforcement people across this country. I'm not afraid to go outside an organization and restructure an organization.
And it needs that right now.
And I think it needs that right now. And unfortunately, when you're part of that system, it's kind of hard to make those choices.
Ed Rollins, thank you very much. Yeah, there's a lot that can be done, should be done.
And needs to be done. And we owe it to those kids, we owe it to those parents.
We absolutely do. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, be sure, everyone, vote in tonight's poll. Do you believe FBI Director Christopher Wray should step down over the Bureau's failure to follow up on a tip that could have prevented the Florida school shooting? Where is the accountability here? Cast your vote on Twitter at Lou Dobbs. All right, coming up, a reminder, follow Lou on Twitter at Lou Dobbs, like him on Facebook, and follow him on Instagram at Lou Dobbs Tonight. On Wall Street, stocks closing mixed. The Dow gaining 19 points, the S&P up 1, and the Nasdaq down 17 points. Volume on the big board, 3.6 billion shares. And for the week, the Dow and S&P up more than 4%. The Nasdaq up more than 5%. Biggest weekly gain in more than 6 years. I'll take it. Consumer sentiment rebounding in February, climbing to a near 14-year high. And housing starts surging nearly 10% last month, hitting the highest level since October 2016. We need a little good news here. A reminder, you can listen to Lose Reports 3 times a day, coast to coast on the Salem Radio Network. All right, up next, Republicans and Democrats at an impasse, shall we say, on immigration. Are they ever going to get anything done in Congress? We are taking it up with Charlie Kirk and Rachel Campostuffy straight ahead. Attorney General Jeff Sessions addressing whether DACA will be settled by March 5th. That's the deadline, of course. And he's making these remarks following what he said in an interview with Maria Bartiromo, exclusive, I should point out. Watch.
I don't know. The people who say they want to fix that, President Trump has offered them that. He's been very generous in his legislation. I think that is a very generous policy. Goes beyond actually what President Obama had in his DACA policy. Goes beyond what even some people who favored the DACA expected. So that's been very generous. So he's already made compromises.
Pretty generous. You know, Maria's interview with the Attorney General is going to air on Sunday Morning Futures this Sunday at 10 a.m. Eastern, so make sure you tune in. Joining me right now, Charlie Kirk, founder and executive editor of Turning Point USA, and Fox Business contributor Rachel Campostuffy. Rachel, he's offering a path to citizenship for 1.8 million people. I mean, I just think that's huge, massive. I don't know if his base is entirely going to like it, but I would think the Democrats would, and yet they're still not going to budge on things like the lottery system? What? I mean, does that not illustrate the breakdown or what?
Listen, the president wants a deal. The president cares about the dreamers. The Attorney General Sessions makes such a great point. This is 3 times what Obama offered. And remember, Obama only offered a temporary status, which was probably going to be overturned in the Supreme Court. President Trump is offering citizenship to 3 times what Obama offered in exchange for what the American people elected him to do, which is to secure the border. So remember, if you don't secure the border, if you don't have the wall, if you don't get rid of the chain migration and the visa lottery system, you're going to have a whole other wave of DACA every 7 years. So this is, let's solve the problem, and let's be so compassionate with those kids who came here through no fault of their own.
Charlie, I don't know how the Democrats argue with this one. I mean, and by the way, if they're not willing to do this deal, I don't know how they justify that to their base.
Well, and look, but here's the key, and Rachel hit it out of the park, but they don't want to solve it because they want perpetual illegal immigration. And we have to attack the motives of the Democrat Party. They don't actually want to have border security or have a system that only legal immigrants are allowed in this country, because they need a continual identity politics groups to keep the Democrat narrative going. See, the Republicans were all about individual empowerment, entrepreneurship, making this the land of opportunity. The Democrats, they can't play on that terrain, so they have to try to always have these oppressed victim groups, and unfortunately that's why they want another 20 million illegal immigrants to come in so they can have permanent political power. And it's so disappointing because, as Rachel rightly mentioned, the president has moved so much on this issue, more than I'm even comfortable with at times, but to get a deal, I think it's worthwhile. So it's so disappointing to see a major political party side with non-citizens just for political power.
Think of how pathetic that is, really. I mean, this is why no one can stand Washington. I want to turn to another big story, obviously, the FBI and the incompetency, shall we say, at the FBI, which has just been illustrated over and over and over and over again, Rachel. I mean, whether we're talking about the Clinton email scandal, whether we're talking about bias at the FBI, you know, they're so busy texting each other about how much they hate Donald Trump, whether it be the willingness of them to be spoon-fed a bunch of junk by the Russians via that dossier that caused them to then go out and get a FISA warrant. And now, of course, we're learning, you know, they weren't doing their job. They weren't doing their job, which means protecting our children. They had been warned about this killer in Florida, and they didn't do anything about it, Rachel. Does something need to change?
They got a very credible, solid tip. And two. One was the one from the YouTube vlogger in September, and then they got another one from somebody who actually knew Nicholas and Cruz, and it was a very credible tip, and they didn't follow up on it. You never know who you run into in the Fox green room. I just ran into, as you're talking about the FISA warrant, I just ran into Carter Page in the green room right here. He showed me a letter that he wrote to former FBI Director Comey. It was from 2 years ago, and he said, listen, you're wasting valuable resources going after me. And look at what just happened. We see that they weren't following up on things that they should have. The main role of the FBI is to prevent what we just saw this week.
But instead, they couldn't prevent it because they were too busy getting duped by the Russians.
And the top leadership was very politicized.
Totally politicized. I mean, that needs to change. And I realize this was Comey's FBI, but Charlie, let's not forget, the new guy, Christopher Wray, was asked this week, do you think there is bias at the FBI? He was asked this at his hearing on Capitol Hill, to which he said, no, there's no bias at the FBI. I mean, for goodness sakes, those text messages between Lisa Page and Peter...
the ones where they said they could smell Trump supporters in Walmart? Yeah, that one. Yes,
yeah, I mean, if that's not bias, I don't know what is, Charlie.
Right.
Is he the right guy to keep leading this organization?
Right, and the FBI has been politicized for many, many years, and it's not even Republican versus Democrat. It's statist versus patriots, and you have people that are trying to protect the power structure within Washington, D.C. against the American people. And it's really scary, the division of it. And as you've seen right now, the FBI is more concerned about trying to prevent the president, well, the now president, from getting reelected than actually doing their job when they have credible threats. And I think the new director, Wray, should resign. I agree with the governor of Florida. It's absolutely ridiculous that this was allowed to happen, and whatever sort of protocol was not followed. Unfortunately, the blood is on their hands. They had two credible sources and follow-ups, and they didn't even visit the guy. They didn't even do any sort of background or anything. It's ridiculous. It's incomprehensible.
10 seconds. Do you agree? Should he resign, Rachel?
Yeah, he should resign, but also lots of signs were missed in this. It wasn't just the FBI, to be fair. There were signs in the community, there were signs in the family, there were all kinds of things going on that we need to pay attention to.
Maybe he should resign, and they should just clean house and get rid of all the politicized bureaucrats there. Thank you so much. Charlie Kirk, Rachel Kemp-Stuffy. We're coming back with a whole lot more. Stay with us.
260 Americans recklessly unmasked by Obama's ambassador to the United Nations. Now watchdogs are demanding to know why. We'll take it up with Chris Farrell from Judicial Watch next. And the Dems abandoning the so-called Dreamers and voting against border security. Much more on the failure of the immigration bill when we return.
An epic failure on behalf of the FBI. They missed, absolutely missed, that tip that they were given about the killer in Florida. They had the opportunity to prevent the massacre that happened, and they failed to do their job. So what does it mean for the FBI? And should Christopher Wray continue to lead it? Joining me right now, Chris Farrell, Director of Investigations and Research for Judicial Watch. Chris, I guess, you know, I look at this and I say, okay, our FBI has failed on many levels, whether it be the Clinton email situation, whether it be getting duped by the Russians with that phony dossier, and then it caused them to be issuing FISA warrants on the opponent's campaign, whether it be just constantly wanting to take down our current president, but yet they missed the most important thing that they're supposed to do, and that's protect our citizens. They didn't even bother to follow up on a tip. So knowing all of this, knowing how politicized this organization has become, and the reality that they're not even doing the job that they are there to do some people need to go? Do we need a reorganization? What are your thoughts, Chris?
People do need to go. You can start with the Director Wray. Frankly, I would go back 200 years to the U.S. Marshal Service. I would create a new division for investigations, and in about 6 to 8 months, I would shut the FBI down, and agents would be allowed to apply for or laterally transfer to a new investigative arm of the U.S. Marshal Service, and the FBI would cease to exist.
Wow.
That's my idea.
Okay, so you're not even just calling for Christopher Wray to move on. You are calling for the organization, for the system. I mean, this is controversial, what you're saying. You don't want to see the FBI in existence at all in its current form.
Well, there's a systemic institutional problem. We can walk it back to the Tsarnaev brothers, where they missed the leads, multiple leads on them. You can go back to Whitey Bulger, for that matter. You can go back to existing corruption in El Paso, Texas. There's all sorts of problems. And at this point, you know, you've got a 200 and some odd year record of the U.S. Marshal Service performing honorable work. So let's create an investigative branch or division within the U.S. Marshal Service. Let the very fine agents at the rank and file level who are trying to do their jobs, let them apply for, be screened, and then admitted to this new investigative division. And then let's take what's left over of obviously a deeply flawed organization, certainly at the headquarters, and shake it out. And let's start over. We don't want to lose good people, and we don't have to. We can simply put them in a new investigative arm of the U.S. Marshal Service, an organization that has served honorably for more than 200 years.
You want to start over, for real. Look, I think the reality is, you know, I don't know if we'll get to that, Chris, but there should be some accountability. And
well,
I don't know if Christopher Wray is the right guy right
you.
now. In fact, I'd say he isn't, given that he doesn't even admit that there is bias to begin with at the FBI.
I agree with you, but here's the problem. If nothing changes, nothing changes. Yeah. There's got to be a radical, very penetrating, severe examination, and you have to turn over some furniture here. We have to really reset the thinking. It's an institutional, cultural question. It's the entity itself has become poisoned.
Yeah. All right. Chris Farrell, thank you very much. It's good to see you tonight. Coming up next, growing calls, as you've been hearing throughout the night, for FBI Director Christopher Wray to resign after the agency failed to act on a tip about the alleged Florida high school shooter. Former FBI agent Bobby Chacon is going to take that up when we return. Do not go anywhere. Bobby's next. Florida Governor Rick Scott today calling on FBI Director Christopher Wray to resign after the Bureau admitted it failed to follow up on that tip about the alleged gunman in the Parkland High School massacre. It has been a very bad week for Wray, who on Tuesday used his testimony before the House Intelligence Committee to make the outlandish claim he saw no anti-Trump sentiment at the FBI.
I encourage our folks not to get too hung up on what I consider to be the noise on TV and in social media.
So you haven't seen any evidence of some sort of inherent political bias in the agency?
No.
So he doesn't see any bias, and his FBI doesn't bother to follow up on a tip that could have saved so many lives. Should he be running that organization right now? Joining me, retired FBI Special Agent Bobby Chacon. Bobby, I mean, you worked at the FBI. What's the difference between when you were there and how it is now?
Well, I'll tell you, Trish, I spent 27 years as an FBI agent in the street. In 27 years, I spent a total of 2 days inside FBI headquarters. I'm not a headquarters guy. I'm not here to justify the behavior of a group that rose to the top of headquarters and had those political biases without question. Those people are being removed. It's taking far too long, but that group of people that kind of subjugated FBI headquarters and co-opted the top leadership positions of FBI headquarters are on their way out.
Yeah, some of them, but look,
some of them.
I mean, Christopher Wray doesn't even see the bias. Here you are saying, yeah, you know, there's bias. We all saw the bias, right? You've seen the text between Lisa and Peter. It's clear there was bias.
It's almost undeniable.
And yet Christopher Wray is sitting there with a straight face saying, no, you know, none of that. Haven't seen it. So if he doesn't even recognize that, I just question whether he can actually do the job.
I wasn't in favor of him when he was nominated, but right now I think we just need a little consistent leadership at the top, and I don't agree that he should step down for the governor of Florida getting his political pound of flesh. I prefer not.
Is it political pound of flesh? I mean, Bobby, for goodness sakes, they didn't do their job. I mean, they didn't even. You could have just entered Nicholas Cruz into a Facebook search and tried to figure out who he was. They didn't.
Right, but
even
Director
try
Wray
that.
didn't do that. Right, but Director Ray didn't do that. But somebody
for the organization itself, or maybe this is perhaps blame that should still be put on Comey, and this was Comey's FBI. I mean, I just look at it and say, look, they're so busy focusing on that Russian dossier, and they're not actually doing what they need to do, Bobby.
Well, in this specific situation, I think that they need to find out who made the huge mistake of not dealing with that information that they got, and that person needs to be disciplined and
Disciplined?
terminated.
Fired. Fired forever with no pension.
Yeah, it could be, and that might be the case, and that might happen. But I think right now,
kids that are dead because nobody bothered to follow up on that term. Okay.
Well, and nobody at the school level who knew this kid was a danger, and the local sheriff who was at the kid's house for 39 times in recent years didn't talk to the school, who knew he was much of a danger and kicked him off campus, and knew he was a danger and told their faculty, don't let him back on campus with a backpack. So you had people at the local level who actually knew this kid was a danger, and nothing was done at that level either. So there's a lot, there's a lot of blame to go around. I'm not excusing what happened at the FBI at all, but for years this kid was a problem. For years those students and friends and neighbors knew this kid was a problem. The police were at his house 39 times. They knew it was a problem. He was introducing himself as a school shooter.
We need to start thinking long and hard about whether or not we allow these crazy people to be free to walk the streets and harm us the way this guy did. I think we need to think long and hard about this society that we live in that's so trusting and so forgiving. And, Bobby, somebody should have alerted a whole lot of people along the way, because he belonged in a mental health institution, not with the ability to go shoot up a school.
The people that are clamoring for new laws and new regulations should be clamoring for new laws aimed at the ability to take these people off the street before they commit a crime, get them into prison or psychiatric facilities where they can get the treatment they need before they carry out these crimes.
Absolutely.
Those are the laws we need. Those are the new regulations we need.
Absolutely. I'm with you, Bobby, but I still think the FBI needs to do a much better job at its job. Thank you.
I agree with you. Okay. I absolutely agree.
Coming up next, everyone, the Russia witch hunt once again turns up no collusion and no wrongdoing by President Trump. We're going to talk about the latest indictments from Robert Mueller with our panel as soon as we come back. And in our online poll, we asked you, do you believe the Dems, to use a Lou phrase, and the rhinos in the Senate have proven yet again they care more about politics than protecting our borders and the safety of our American citizens? And you know what? 96% of you say yes. Joining me right now, radio talk show host Dom Giordano and Washington Times columnist, radio talk show host, and Fox Business contributor Tammy Bruce. Tammy.
Hey there.
I mean, today's been such a frustrating day. I mean, it's been such a down, day, as was yesterday.
Yeah.
A sad day. But now we learned that the FBI could have prevented this. I mean, or maybe if they couldn't have prevented it, they could have at least tried to have done some research, right, into this guy. And they didn't.
This is helpful because the original impact is the world is in chaos. There's nothing we can do. How can we stop this? In fact, now we've learned that the citizenry did their job. That everybody did their thing who is a citizen, whether it's the blogger on YouTube, the neighbors, the school kids, people had learned how to recognize the issues. They did so. They reported it. Police going out to the house, etc. The problem is when all of us did our job, all the normals did their job, we get it to the federal level and they shrug. That is now the shocking dynamic. As we talk about the details of things, yes, like school security, firearms, etc., we're going to have those debates. But the bottom line is, will any of that matter, Trish, if when you get it to the federal level, they either don't care, they shrug, or I don't know why, when you've got one job and you have it handed to you on a silver platter and you do not act, is a sign that the entire system effectively, certainly at least law enforcement, is degraded and devolved internally. It will take more than Christopher Wray resigning. This is large. Well, absolutely, but this is also malfeasance that it has contributed to death. these arguably could be looked at as criminal actions as well because of the nature of what they did not do.
Yeah. No, I mean, the last guest, I got under my skin a little bit because he said, well, there should be some disciplinary action. It's a lot more. I mean, you bring up criminal. I mean, this is criminal to think that you had this information, you didn't do anything about it, and now these kids there in Florida are dead as a result. But, you know, Dom, what can we expect? They're so busy looking into the dossier and trying to figure out, you know, how President Trump somehow colluded with the Russians to win the election. It seems to me that they don't understand priorities right now.
Well, what's shocking to me, again, and I agree with everything Tammy said, and I hope we slow down and we have a national conversation and debate and even agreement how shocking it is that the FBI dropped the ball. I know I've been talking about, I think Tammy too, at the upper level we've been distinguishing from the field work of the FBI, but there's been a trail of this over the last several years that calls into question either their basic competency or their basic caring about this, and this throwing up your hands approach of chaos, we can't do anything, is false. They could have here, and they seem to have just said this isn't a big deal to them. If they need more agents, if they need more budget to do their work, they ought to say it tonight. Otherwise, we believe the worst about the FBI.
You know, and Tammy, think about it. I mean, they encourage us, as you said, to say something. And you take a little bit of a risk, right, when you do. Somebody might call you an Islamophobe or say, you know, you're paranoid. And yet, you know, we give them this opportunity and they waste it. They don't do anything with it.
We have to know that we've done what we can do, and now we've got to demand that we get what we deserve at the federal level.
I'm all for that. Thank you, Dom Giordano, Tammy Bruce. Good evening, everyone. I am Trish Regan in for Lou Dobbs tonight. Breaking news tonight. President Trump at this hour visiting Broward Health North, the hospital treating victims of this week's tragic school shooting in Parkland, Florida. The president's visit coming as FBI Director Christopher Wray faces calls to resign after the agency admitted it failed to act on a tip that essentially predicted the high school massacre 6 weeks ago. A person close to the confessed shooter, Nicholas Cruz, contacted the FBI on January 5th to report concerns he was plotting a school shooting and wanted to kill people. Now Attorney General Jeff Sessions has ordered a review of how that information could have ever been ignored. We're going to take all that up right here tonight. The other major story we are following, everyone, Special Counsel Robert Mueller today charging 13 Russian nationals and 3 Russian entities for trying to interfere in our elections. The Russians allegedly conducted information warfare against the U.S., but the DOJ made it clear that no American was a knowing participant in this illegal activity. President Trump reacting to the news, claiming vindication, tweeting that it's clear his campaign did nothing wrong. We're going to discuss the special counsel probe and the stunning lack of collusion evidence with Chris Farrell of Judicial Watch and Ed Rollins. Also with us, renowned attorney and legal scholar Jonathan Turley, all coming